third force unites. It's strange that many don't understand that the Persian-Jewish conflict is the beginning of the forceful closure of the biblical project of the Jews, those expecting the end of the world, and the most pro-Israeli U.S. President, Trump, has already fallen into this process throughout the history of the United States. 10 years ago, I wrote about the Heavenly Jerusalem project, which was supposed to be implemented on Ukrainian territory. But the Jewish lobby failed. The event started in Ukraine gave rise to the war in the Middle East, and this war is not a consequence of Ukrainian events, but the epicenter of all military actions planned by globalists, who now really have nothing to lose. The end of the biblical project will deprive them of everything they have accumulated through hard work. That's why representatives of business began to come to power in the USA, naively believing that it was they who created the USA. It's not true. The Zionists created the USA. Many people, citizens of the USA and Europe, who call themselves Christians and are not ethnic Jews, actively support Israel's actions. Where did this phenomenon come from? Zionism is now considered exclusively a Jewish religious political movement, but this is not true. The ideas of Zionism were stolen by the Zionists themselves from Christian biblical scholars, that is, apostolic Christians knowledgeable in the heresy of the Jews. All of this was born in England by the Puritans, from the word pur, lottery, and the festival of Purim. I won't stop here on this festival, which I explained well in a miniaturized story about Elena Voloshanka, the biblical Esther, and the English Mary Stuart, the lady in charge. The miniature Search for a Woman. I'll just say that this festival is not at all ancient, but in honor of the fact that Jews managed to avoid a pogrom in Russia during the time of Ivan the Terrible, whose real name was Tit Smaragd Emerald, Ivan Vasilyevich Rurik. The first name means honor, dignity. In any noble crown, not to mention the royal one, there is a green emerald, smaragd, a symbol of Byzantium, Constantinople. The green flag and the green color are symbols of Constantinople, the second Visanti, or Byzantium, the capital city of our civilization, which arose in the early 6th century on the remnants of the previous one, which perished due to the eruption of the Krakatoa volcano. Miniature, How the Viking Balda Paid Off with the Priest. The red color, the red flag, and the ruby are symbols of Russia, the third Anti, or the third Rome. That's why we have ruby stars on the Kremlin. The Bolsheviks knew something about the past of Russia. Antiquity refers to the three Romes, the first of which was Alexandria. The memory of it has practically not survived, except for the story of the exodus from Alexandria to the Promised Land, that is, to Byzantium on the Bosphorus. About the first or Old Rome, we know practically nothing. As for Greece, or Joris, it refers to the same Constantinople, the second Rome. But on noble crowns, the pearl is preserved, usually in the form of a cross. This sign meant the waters between two empires, where members of the same Roman dynasty ruled. Today, our borders still take into account territorial waters. That is, any noble crown speaks of Russia and Constantinople and the surrounding northern and southern waters, heavens and subterranean lands, and the stones, ruby, honor, emerald, respect. I have already explained that Christianity did not begin with Jesus, but from God the Father. From Jesus, as the King of Glory, came Slavdom, the teaching about the immortality of the soul. The name terrible meant belonging to both branches, Russian Israeli branch and Byzantine Jewish branch of the Roman dynasty. But let's return to the Puritans. If you remember, I explained where the rise of England and indeed the Anglo-Russians began. The British Isles played in the Slavic Empire the same role as later the Solovetsky Islands for the Romanovs. They were a prison. and that's why there are so many castles in those areas. It was there that the Godunovs fled with the imperial treasury. That's when Puritanism and the rise of England appeared. No, the Godunovs were not Jews, but it was they who first came up with the idea of creating for the Jews, who were the guild of treasurers of the Slavic Empire, the now-known ghettos. That is, it was intended to allocate a territory for this people where they would live compactly. Accountants are needed, they were taken from there. Too many, they were driven into the ghetto. And since then, the whole world was ruled by Rus, the Slavic Empire, and it began to implement its plans. Thus, many ghettos appeared in the world, and the very idea of them. And since the Guild of Treasurers consisted of despised worldwide half-slaves dealing with money, that is, money is evil, and their creators were actually Slavs, that is, Israelis, they were called servants of Israel, that is, of Rus, Israelis. The idea was correct and progressive. Rus long practiced such ghettos for other specialists and called them slobodas. It was logical to have slobodas for accountants. So from this idea were born hopes for their own land, which the Jews did not have. It's simple. Other professions were tied to the land, while treasurers were tied to the money box. That is, Israelis are slaves of the Slavs, wherever they are sent, counting the imperial money. One of the most oppressed castes in the existing statehood dis. This was until the time of the Great Turmoil, until the power of the Romans was overthrown by the Romanovs. The last Roman emperors, the Godunovs, fled to the islands in England with large sums of money. Jews were needed. As you can see, Purim is not a salvation from the pogrom of Jews, but a salvation of the Godunovs from the executions of the Romanovs. Money required accounts, but the Jews were not particularly eager to join the Russian cabal. Something had to be offered. For example, show the strength of the Godunovs with the uprising of Oliver Cromwell and the execution of King Charles, and finally some bright idea that would interest the entire Jewish people. Unexpectedly left with the master's money, but without masters, since the empire had fallen and a struggle for independence was underway around the world, Jews again needed masters, but under different conditions. John Owen, a theologian, member of Parliament, and administrator of Oxford, taught that the physical return of Jews to Palestine, which is simply slobodas, was necessary for the fulfillment of the prophecy about the last times. And in 1621, Sir Henry Finch wrote a sermon calling for support of the Jewish people and their return to their biblical homeland. That is, the idea of their own state, as if previously existing. One of the most influential directions of Christian Zionism became dispensationalism, a system of interpretation that uses information from the Bible to divide history into various periods of management, or dispensations, and considers the biblical term Israel as denoting an ethnic Jewish nation created in Palestine, Sloboda simply. Dispensationalism was initially developed by the English-Irish preacher John Nelson Darby in the 19th century. Darby believed that the predetermined fates of Israel and the Christian Church were completely separate, with the latter to be physically caught up, lifted up to meet Jesus before the predicted period of upheaval in the Apocalypse, called the Great Tribulation. According to Darby, the Great Tribulation would begin after the construction of the third Jewish temple on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. During the Great Tribulation, according to this teaching, 144,000 Jews would convert to Christianity, and this would reveal the true intentions of the Antichrist. Thus, they would become the center of conversion to Christianity for all non-believers who had not been caught up. These 144,000 converted Jews would meet the Antichrist in the final battle known as Armageddon and defeat the Antichrist. After this battle, the 7-year tribulation would end, and Jesus would return to imprison Satan and establish a 1,000-year messianic kingdom on earth. Despite the absurdity and lack of any mention in the Bible, the concept of the physical removal of Christians to heaven before Armageddon was enthusiastically accepted by some churches in England, and especially in the United States.
Remember the time when the president-elect, Trump, lost the election and Biden came to power? Especially the storming of the Capitol. More than 500 Jewish activists were arrested in the USA for seizing one of his buildings. All of them are members of the organization Jewish Voice for Peace, which was the initiator of the protest in the American Capitol. The organization is based on the principle of belonging to the Jewish ethnicity, and there is a council of rabbis in it, most of whom are interested in or engaged in Kabbalah. Interesting girls' dance. The storming of the U.S. Congress was done by Kabbalists, whose sacred phrase, tikkun olam, means repairing the world, of course under the protection of Jews. In the middle of the 16th century, the Kabbalist Isaac Luria developed an original metaphysical concept. In it, the creation of the world was explained by the contraction of God. In the resulting void, the vessels of the 10 Kabbalistic Sephirot are formed, which are filled with divine light. However, the vessels cannot withstand the light and break. The light spills into the abandoned world of shells. To collect the light, the Shekinah, the divine presence, also known as the Jewish people, is sent into this world of demonic entities and nations, Goyim. Its task from now on is to collect the light and restore the world to its original paradisical state, tikkun olam. Then the end of the world will come, and the Shekinah will return to its place, the Sephirah Malkuth, kingship, and the promised king of Israel, the Messiah, will come. As you can see, the same Messiah is simply a reworked Russian tale about the White King, which was passed on by the Puritans, one of the versions of the Old Believers' Agreement to which the last Russian tsars, the Godunovs, belonged. The word pur means absorption or gathering, unity. For example, purga. The Puritans are gatherers of the world, that is, the same Zionists. Surprised? Wait until you see what's coming next. I already said that Tan 10 is an heir. For example, my grandson is Tan 10. The Puritans are heirs of Pur, unity. The deposed dynasty of Russian tsars, associated with the God-accepted covenant and chosenness of the people entrusted to them, knew all the ways of ruling people, but was betrayed by the very chosen Russian people, its majority, who fell for the promises of the Romanovs and rose up in the time of troubles against the God-given tsars from the time of their ancestor Jacob and his 12 holy Russian tribes, Israelite. So the tsars did not betray the people and remained faithful to the covenant and those who remained old believers. Upon arriving on the British Isles, the Godunovs brought not only the gold of Rus, but also its faith against which all of Europe rose. This faith was extremely unpopular in Europe since based on the old Russian position of Bati, Ivan Kaliita, the Catholic Vatican, Vatican, emerged. Then, on the islands, first in the Solovetsky monasteries where the fleeing Godunovs arrived, the Puritans were created. Thus, the third force appeared and immediately began to act. First, the huge money brought by the Godunovs was invested into the European economy, leading to numerous wars of the Reformation. The Godunovs introduced the slogan, "Divide and rule," perfectly understanding that money is a sphere of strife and hatred. The Europe that broke away from the empire began to fight among themselves over material benefits, and there has not been a single successful attempt to unite all these former colonies of the empire. The abandoned money corrupted the European peoples, and only the naive believe in the strength of the EU or NATO. To lead the insurgents astray, the Godunovs invented a new chosen people, accountants and treasurers. Europeans believed this because it was the treasurers who brought them financial flows, and even the Vatican priests believed in the Jewish miracle. Thus, the long-awaited biblical project emerged in Europe. The Godunovs saved Russia from attack, laying a long-term bomb in the Western world in the form of Zionist ideas, which the Kabbalists fell for. The Godunovs themselves, in their fully controlled England, created a shadow economy based on paper money and banks. Naturally, they used very naive Jews who were eager for historical values stolen from the Russian epic. The creation of the Zionist state in the Middle East was organized by Russia and England, the latter blindly. What we see in the world today is the result of actions laid by our tsars, the Godunovs, and Trump is one of the Zionists who fell into this trap. And the unification or gathering of lands and peoples is already taking place under the tolerance of the Russian world, although the Kabbalists-Jews have nothing to do with it at all. Today, they are not just in a debt pit. Well, everyone will soon see for themselves. For now, this information about the global scapegoat is enough. Commissar Qatar, 19th of June, 2025.